I'm easy to find. But what I want to say now in closing is that, spending the time with you was a no-brainer. And I just think, Ken, that you walk the talk. I feel your energy like a furnace that burns inside of you, and how much you care to help people and why you do this. And it's so clear. And in our first conversation, you opened up and you went first. You just kind of shared who you are, why you do what you do. You didn't hold anything back. You shared your own vulnerabilities, and hopefully I did in return. And I just appreciate you a ton, man.
Hey everybody, I'm Ken Newhouse, and I'm going to welcome you to the Get Clients Now podcast, the show where high-growth consultants and professionals come to access the newest and most effective methods and systems for online marketing, advanced sales and persuasive communication strategies, and automated marketing funnels. And if you're wondering if the Get Clients Now podcast can help you get more high-value clients, enjoy more sales, build a massive tribe, and make more money, you're absolutely going to love this show.
Newhouse's work completely blows everything else that we've ever done with Google out of the water.
I have been looking for a way to grow my presence online, and what I've viewed from Newhouse's work was something that certainly is faster than anything I've seen before.
He says he's going to do something and he does it. He does it in the time frame that he says he's going to do it in. It's exciting when you talk about the results that you're going to get, and you can believe his word because he follows it up with action.
The Newhouse is direct. He's to the point. He tells you what's on his mind, and he backs his words up. From what I know now, from working with him, he's passionate about his work, and he backs it up 100%.
What I like best is you offer something that no one else has out there, which is a pretty comprehensive approach about marketing a system.
If somebody asks me, should they use Newhouse's team? Absolutely, because you're going to get the important information that you need very, very quickly.
On the internet, on the different marketing techniques, I've never experienced anything like this.
I would definitely recommend Ken Newhouse for someone who's serious about growing their business. I think that your results based on the numbers would at least double the sales in a very short time frame.
Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here from KenNewhouse.com, and I want to welcome you back to the Get Clients Now podcast, where the one-size-fits-all marketing model is dumb, the client-centric business model is king, and the sales control system gives you the tools to build your tribe with certainty. This is episode number 327 of the Get Clients Now podcast. And today we're continuing our series on how to use the power of stories and storytelling so you can become magnetic and irresistible to your perfect prospects, your patients, and your clients. Now, today's guest is best-selling author Ben Zoldan, who co-authored the book, What Great Salespeople Do, which, by the way, is not a book about salespeople. That just happens to be the title that McGraw-Hill slapped on the book. And Ben actually talks about that today during the interview. And we'll actually be getting to part one of the interview that I did with Ben here in just a few minutes, but I want to share a few things with you first. Now, as a regular listener, as a member of the Get Clients Now Nation, listening to the Get Clients Now podcast, you know that about 55, almost 60% of the people that listen to this show are dentists. And I want to actually give you a little side note here. I'm going to be starting a new podcast the week between Christmas and New Year's 2019, a show that is specifically for dentists, not just any dentists. The name of that show is .com Dentist. And I wasn't going to actually play this for you, but here's the opening intro cut, the intro music that's going to play at the beginning of every episode of .com Dentist.
Have you ever had a dream that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world?
What is happening to me?
The answer is out there. It's the question that drives us.
What is a .com Dentist?
The .com Dentist uncovers the world that's been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
They're watching you.
Successful dentists like you are a disease. You are a cancer to the corporate model. And we are the cure.
Get me a computer and an internet connection.
Welcome to the real world.
So you're here to save the dental profession?
So what do you need?
Marketing weapons. Lots of marketing weapons.
No one's ever done anything like this.
That's why it's going to work.
Buckle your seatbelt, Dorothy. 'Cause Kansas is going bye-bye.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what a .com dentist is. You have to see it for yourself.
And that show is designed to help dentists who want to get more of those high-value fee-for-service new patients, the cash new patients. And they're looking for those kind of patients because, quite honestly, third-party insurance reimbursements keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You guys know I've talked about it many, many times. Actually, it's been a while since I talked about it, but the last 9 years I was in private practice as a chiropractor. I had multiple clinics, had a lot of people working for me. All of my clinics were cash. I refused to accept insurance because many years ago, I realized that insurance companies weren't in the business to really serve people. They were in business to make money, to make profit, to make a profit on purpose. And while I agree with that model, I didn't agree with being enslaved and trapped and serving the insurance company. My relationship was with my patient. And so I didn't want someone sitting behind a desk, oftentimes someone who had no idea what it is that I did, they had no firsthand knowledge or experience or interaction with my patients, but yet they were telling me what was allowable in the form of treatment, what I was allowed to do for my patient, what I was allowed to charge for, what I was allowed to get paid for, what I could actually bill for. And so as a result of that, I became a cash practice. And today the same thing is happening in the dental profession. Dentists are asked to work harder and harder and harder and do more and more and more, and they make less and less and less. And I know if you're not a dentist, you're probably thinking, well, they make plenty of money. Quite honestly, guys, the amount of overhead a dentist has to pay just to stay in practice would blow your mind. And how much of the money they make gross, their practice makes gross, the percentages that these people are taking home on average would shock you. And so once the show .com Dentist starts, and we've actually recorded multiple episodes already, once .com Dentist starts, that podcast starts, I'm going to focus this show, the Get Clients Now podcast, almost exclusively on helping coaches, consultants, and service-based business owners that are not dentists. Now, you might be wondering why I'm mentioning this right now. A couple of reasons for that. Well, first and foremost, the obvious reason is because I've got a new show coming out, and I want to actually let as many of you people who are dentists listening to this show to be looking for that show. Okay? Number two, I want to actually address a few of the questions that have come in recently from some of the dentists who are regular listeners to this show, the Get Clients Now podcast, about this whole business of, quote, using stories in their practice, like in their case presentations, when they ask for referrals, in their dental marketing, on their dental practice websites, so they can become more profitable. Now, based on what I've heard from our dentist clients and those of you who are members of the Get Clients Now Nation who are dentists, and from what I've read, I think most of you guys who are dentists get this whole idea, meaning that, you understand the power of story and you're definitely interested in learning how to incorporate it into your practice and your marketing. But a few of you guys who are dentists, actually one gal, seem to think that these episodes on using story is somewhat silly. And while you're entitled to your opinion, albeit an uninformed and uneducated opinion, what I'd like to do today before I actually bring Ben in on the show is I'd like to play a few short audio clips. Actually, these were videos, but I'm stripping the audio off, and I want to play these clips from two of the world's leading experts on using stories to sell more of your stuff. Now, the first clip is from a recent presentation that Doug Stevenson gave at Google. And last time I checked, most everybody knows who Google is. So the fact that this guy is giving a presentation at the headquarters of Google says a lot about his credibility and his effectiveness. The second clip I want to play for you guys was taken from a recent TEDx talk in Stockholm, and I guess that's in Sweden last time I checked. Now, before I play the first clip of Stevenson's presentation at Google, let me give you a little bit of context. Stevenson has just asked all 1,100 people in the room to raise their hands. They can remember a favorite childhood memory or a favorite movie they saw as a child in less than 3 seconds. So he counts to 3, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. By the time he gets to 3, every hand in the room went up. So Stevenson asks one person in the audience, and he picks one to share a childhood memory. And actually, the guy talks about how the memory made him feel. And then he picks another person from the audience and how the movie that he saw as a child or remembered as a child, how that made him feel, right? Stevenson says this.
And so this is what happens to your brain. Literally, story is the most important communication tool you can have in your tool belt if you want to be memorable, if you want to be persuasive, Now, if you don't want to be memorable, if you want to just flap your lips and say a whole bunch of stuff in a room and people walk out and go delete and they go on with their business and nothing changes, then you don't need story. But if you want to be memorable like that movie and all of those scenes and all of that detail, then you need to be masterful with story. Now, here's the thing about everybody's memory just now. Why that childhood memory? Why that movie? Because it was an emotionally charged event. Would you agree that that childhood memory had some joy or sorrow, pleasure or pain at some level? For those of you who had a childhood memory, yes or no? Was it an emotionally charged event? Okay. The movie. Was that a joyous movie? Do you really dig that movie? It was fun. So if you had a movie, like, why do you remember it? Because it was a cool movie. Because I dug it. Because while I was watching that, it was fun. It was exciting. We don't remember things that aren't emotionally charged. So if you've ever given a boring presentation that was filled with all kinds of incredible data and it didn't stick, that's because there was no emotional connection. So the quote on this page from the book Brain Rules by John Medina, one important area of research is the effect of emotion on learning. Emotionally arousing events tend to be better remembered than neutral events. They persist much longer in our memories and are recalled with greater accuracy than neutral events. Emotion is the fast lane to the brain. If you can infuse your presentation with emotion, and I don't mean you got to stand up here and cry, but I mean you get into it. You have some energy, you have some emotion, you're charged by this story, and if it's a personal story, it has that emotion in it. So emotion is the fast lane to the brain.
So as it turns out, stories, as he put it, are, quote, the fast lane to the brain. And if you want your presentations to be memorable, if you want them to be acted upon, you can't simply rely on regurgitating a bunch of facts to your prospects. Your presentations and your requests for referrals specifically have got to elicit emotion from your prospects. And the most effective way you can do that is by using well-crafted stories. Not just any stories, like, sometimes I like to tell stories about the big fish that I caught or that huge whitetail buck that I shot last year. No, these have to be stories that have a purpose. Well-crafted, well-designed, well-thought-out stories. True stories, if you ask me, they need to be true, right? But you need to have these in your arsenal of stories, okay? Now, in our next clip, which as I previously mentioned, this is taken from a recent TEDx talk in Stockholm, and this is where David J.P. Phillips talked about how stories can make what we're selling appear more valuable to our prospects, patients, and clients, which means, listen very carefully because this is really important. This means when you use the right kinds of stories in your presentations, you can sell your services and your products for a lot more than what you're currently selling them for, regardless of whether or not your prospects view what you're selling as a commodity. And certainly with the proliferation of online competition, most of our businesses, right or wrongly, are viewed as commodity businesses by the marketplace.
In 2009, a man, a journalist, by the name Rob Walker, wanted to find out is storytelling really the most powerful tool of all? And in order to do this, he went on his computer and he bought 200 objects from eBay. And the average price of the objects were about $1. He then called 200 authors and he asked them, hey, would you like to be part of the significant object study? Which means that I would like to write a story to one of the objects. And 200 authors said yes. So there he had 200 objects, he had 200 stories, and I assume that it was with nail-biting anticipation that he went on eBay again with all the 200 objects. Would there be a difference? Would there be a change? Do you think there was a change? One of the objects was this beautiful horse's head. There we go. The beautiful horse's head. Now, this beautiful horse's head was bought for 99 cents and was sold, when a story was added, for $62.95. That is a slight increase of 6,395%. So was this a one-off situation? Not really, because he bought the 200 objects for a total of $129, selling them for $8,000. Now that's insane. But you know what's even more intellectually challenging to understand is how can you and I go to the movies and pay good money to watch movies like James Bond, who are absolutely unrealistic. And we sit there, we enjoy the movie, and some of us, we really enjoy the movie. And we leave the theater going like, God, what a man. I would like to be more like him. I'd like to walk like him. I'd like to talk like him. I like Bond. Wonder how I could be more like Bond. And then this weird revelation hits you like from nowhere, and you come up with a brilliant idea to walk to a watchmaker shop. And wow, it just happens to be an Omega watch in that shop that resembles the one that Bond was wearing in the movie. And you pay $10,000 to put that watch on your wrist, and you leave that store feeling more like Bond. How is that possible? PQ Media tells us that $10.5 billion is turned over in product placement revenue every single year. How is it possible for you to be so easily tricked by something so simple as a story? Well, it all comes down to one core thing, and that is emotional investment. The more emotionally invested you are in anything in your life, the less critical and the less objectively observant you become.
Now, isn't that interesting? Products sold on eBay, and you couldn't see the video, but the horse head he talks about, it's like one of those that you buy from Hobby Lobby. It's like a little ceramic. It's not very high-end at all. Looks like a kid painted it, but by adding a story along with the horse head, it was able to be sold for thousands of percentage points higher than what it was actually paid for. Think about that. Think about how that can impact your business. So that's why I'm doing this series on using story to grow your practice in your business. That's why, as an example, I've created the Practice Storyline, which is a framework that you can use to integrate the elements of story into your practice or business. And that's why I've been having world-renowned experts on this show. Experts who are teaching you how to use stories so you can become more magnetic and irresistible to your perfect prospects, your patients, your clients. So you can sell a lot more of your stuff and become more profitable. This series we've been doing is about storytelling technology, a technology that we've developed so that all you have to do is literally push the buttons, use what I'm giving you, and it just works. Now, on today's show, as I previously mentioned, we're going to be talking with Ben Zoldan, co-founder of Storyleaders and best-selling author of the book, What Great Salespeople Do. And Ben's going to show us how using vulnerability and authenticity in the stories that we tell our prospects, our patients, and clients can literally explode the effectiveness of our stories and ramp up our results very, very quickly. All right, before we bring Ben in on the show, let's go ahead and do a quick review of his bio. Ben co-founded Storyleaders back in 2008 as an accidental research project. Ben says, "For my entire career before that, I had pledged my allegiances to processes, systems, playbooks, efficiencies, KPIs, all the things geared towards getting results and going by the numbers. I didn't know it then, but my loyalties had unintended consequences. Me, my team, and the culture we had created in our business had shoved aside all the good stuff, creativity, imagination, inspiration, everything it means to be human, all the things that make great people so great and great teams magical. Through research, diving into unexplored disciplines, applying new approaches, and being forced to question my own way of doing things, I've come to learn so many things that had been hidden from me. Specifically, there's a better way to connect with ourselves, with each other, with our work, with our prospects and clients, and find purpose in what it is that we do, and do it in the way that we're just not doing today. My aim now is to work with leaders to design cultures devoted to people, where everyone knows that they're making a real difference, that their work genuinely matters, and that they're part of something bigger than themselves. One of the methods that we use and teach to help accomplish this is storytelling. Storytelling from the point of authenticity and vulnerability, which requires us to shed the Superman suit and show people important to us who we really are. All right, that's going to wrap up Ben's bio, and if you're ready, let's go ahead and bring him in on the show. Okay, everybody, we got Ben Zoldan, who's one of the authors. He's the co-author of What Great Salespeople Do. It's a phenomenal book. He's also, I guess you're like the founder and chief of Storyleaders. Does that sound about right, Ben?
Chief what?
Chief in charge of pretty much anything important. How's that sound?
Well, I have two daughters. I don't feel like I'm the chief of them. I'm going to ask you, what did you like about the book?
The thing that really captivated me about the book is that I'm really into learning I'm trying to master the art of story, because the deeper I get into this, the more I realize I don't know. I've been doing NLP for a very long time. I'm a direct response copywriter. And so I understand the critical importance of communication. I also teach, I wrote a book called Sales Control, and I didn't write the book to, it's not like your book. You had a publisher. I self-published, but I used it more as a tool, a targeted tool. But having said that, the content's really good, but I understand that story is critical. It is absolutely essential to being able to communicate at a very high level, a very successful level, in light of all the noise that we have today, and in light of all the competition that we face, especially if we're doing anything online, and especially when we're selling high-ticket services or products. I work a lot with dentists, and some of these dentists are doing, as an example, they're doing like full mouth restorations, or they're doing stuff they learned at Pankey Institute, or stuff they like a technique called biorejuvenation, where it's restoring function as well as the cosmetic end of it. Some of these cases are like $100,000 per patient. And so these are people that need to know how to communicate effectively at a high level to get people to accept what it is they're doing. I also work with people that are like internet marketers and things like that. But more and more, I've been moving back towards working with dentists exclusively, just because I see a new challenge, a new opportunity, and the money is really good. So, and having said that, just check this real quick. It's my love that I had for helping patients in chiropractic. It's almost like, I'm not actually working on people now, other than my wife and my kids and my friends. I don't adjust anybody, but I can, through the dentist, I can help benefit their patients. So it's kind of an indirect way of still, practicing to help.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about my book, I'm not a big fan of my book. I hate the name of the book, and it probably scares people off. I don't know if I'd want to pick up a book about what great salespeople do. Most of us want to run away from salespeople. In fact, I'll tell you a quick one. The reason we have that name is, and this will be my way of introducing it, is after being immersed in a career of selling for 15 years, at every angle of selling, marketing, customer support, I had this like cognitive dissonance with my own career. Even though I was like thriving on the outside, I just felt so hollow and shallow inside. Like I wasn't making a difference. I can tell you that when people ask me what I did for a living, it'd be like, I'm in sales, and then I would change the subject. I was just embarrassed, and I didn't feel like I was making a difference or my work mattered. And I just set off on a journey. I said, screw this. And I set out on a journey. I didn't know where I was going. It's kind of like if you go on a trip somewhere, you know exactly where you're going. I have a trip to Chicago. I fly back Friday at 4. I'm back home at 8 p.m. Like that's a trip. But when you're on like a real journey where you don't know where you're going, like unbelievable things happen. So I wanted to go understand at the time my career, like how do I influence the world? I just wanted to put my handprints on the world in a way that felt like it was making a difference. And it was like this domino effect. I got just immersed in this really intense research and started to study things so far outside of selling. And I was like, oh my gosh, I figured it out. Like to sell, we got to stop selling. We got to care for people. Like what would that really be like to have those kinds of relationships with people? Like I must suck at some of this stuff, And it was years of research trying to piece things together. And I saw there's solutions out there. But they were kind of on the fringe. And there's people out there that were relating to the world so much different than most of us, at least that I was in the way that I was relating to the world. Mine was very mechanical and programmatic. And if you ask people around me, I was pretty hardcore and intense in how I'd approach people, whether it was parenting or friending or people on the streets, right? It's kind of like going through life with a hammer. And I found that there's this grace in which we can communicate with people. And I was no expert at this stuff, but I was like really inspired. And publisher McGraw-Hill got wind of what my co-founder and I were doing and wanted us to write a book. And it was rooted in storytelling. And so we published this, we wrote this book, and we were commissioned to write this book. And by the way, at this point, I can't even like read, which is so silly now when I think about it. But we took us about a year or year and a half. We turned in the manuscript, but we don't have a title of the book. And like a couple months in, my publisher is just getting super frustrating with us. And she's like, we need a name. We need a book. We need a title. And I was like, this is a book about what great salespeople do. I think I yelled at her. And she goes, let me call you back in 5 minutes. And I was like, okay. And 5 minutes later, she called me back. She goes, I think we have a title. I'm like, what? She goes, yeah, I checked. Whatever. She had to check. She's like, yeah, what great salespeople do. there's the title. I was like, okay, didn't really think much about it. And it was kind of catchy. But now when I look back, I share that story because it was never about what great salespeople do. It was really about what great people do. And I'm no moral authority or an expert in what it means to be great. Scares the shit out of me to use those words, but I think it was for me an attempt to try to uncover like where that kind of greatness happens. And in the world that we live in, it's not about being a great athlete or performance on a court or on the field and executing something that has an expertise. But for those of us that are like in the business, in the world of relating to other people, what would that be like? What would greatness in that realm be like? And I had these mentors. So to me, it's really an expose on what great people do and the real movers and shakers in the world. And that's what I want to talk about. That's what I'm trying to share with the world. I've learned so many lessons about that.
All right, we'll dive into that in a minute. I just want to add this about selling. Anybody who's in business, in fact, anybody who's employed, in fact, anyone who's a human being has to understand and know how to sell, and not from the standpoint of, high pressure, scripted. And I am a person who likes scripts, which I wanted to ask you about in just a little bit. But I wanted to expound on that just a bit before I ask you. But everybody's in sales. When our kids, when they're little, said, "Hey, Dad, I want ice cream." And you're like, "Man, I'm tired. Let's go home. Your soccer game was long. We're going to have dinner shortly." And they're like, "Dad, do you have a daughter?" I have 2 daughters and a son. But, when a little girl asks you, one of your little kids, they're like, "Dad, can we just have an ice cream? You promised." That's selling. And so selling is, in my mind, ethically persuading or getting someone over to your, to your side of the fence. And
we suck at that. Like, I'm a political junkie. I studied poli-sci in college, which is probably the only reason I got into sales. There's nothing else out there for me.
Because I haven't heard that before from anybody. That's why they got into sales.
Yeah, like I didn't, So, but I can't even turn on the news anymore. The way people just relate to one another.
It's harsh. Yeah.
Everybody's just in their own camps. And what we suck at is breaking down barriers. It's interesting when you bring that up, and I'm thinking about whether the industry of dentistry or just, medicine and health. I have a good friend who is a cancer surgeon, and I was with him at a conference, and he was talking to other cancer surgeons. He's this world-renowned oncologist, and he's talking to other surgeons, and he was telling the story about how he gets these letters from patients, and he's in the business of nose or throat and neck cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So he's in a pretty hardcore business. He says 50% of his clients or patients don't live.
Yeah, it has a high mortality rate, yeah.
Yeah, so he doesn't know which ones, but he says that he spends a lot of time reading the letters from his survivors, and they're always like, "Thanks, doc, for saving my life." And he was sharing with the other cancer surgeons that, like, every one of us in the room, all of us, can do the surgery. We all can take a tumor out and diagnose and prescribe. It was almost describing that as like the commodity. And I was like blown away, by thinking about that level of expertise that would go into that kind of work. And yet that's the commodity. And he was telling the story about this one patient who said, "Thanks, doc, for saving my life." And he was talking about how these patients are not thanking them for that surgery. They're thanking them for something different. And here's what he was talking about.
Yep.
Now, before the patients even embark on this journey with him, they make a life or death decision. Are they going to try to fight this thing? And he goes, that comes purely from the bond he creates with his patients. Like, can he create the kind of bond where people are willing to do something together? And I thought about that, and while that's literal for him, it's like this figurative thing for me. Like, before we ask people to do stuff with us, are we creating the kind of bonds where we would move mountains for each other? And they could be little things. They could be like something innocuous, like, we get in an Uber tonight and somebody's going to drive us, to a restaurant that's 15 minutes away. Like, there's opportunities that we could create bonds with one another that make that ride so much more important. Like, it matters. And we forget about this human connection that is like our operating system, but we pay no mind to it because all we do is the surgery. All we do is, here are the policies if I'm a politician. If I'm a dentist, here's the mechanics. And then it feels bad. It feels yucky because we go in there and we're all treated like we're just going through procedures.
So this is like right aligned with the book where you talked about approaching or starting off a conversation or a presentation or whatever it is, regurgitating a bunch of facts versus really trying to elicit emotions and understanding your patient or your prospect, whoever that might be, instead of just looking at them as a mechanical object, looking at them as a real human being and trying to engage with them on a very real emotional level. Is that kind of where you're going with this?
Yeah. Like what would that be like if we got each other?
Well, I mean, you highlighted it in the book really well, and I'm sure you do this in your trainings as well. Obviously, you talk a lot about vulnerability, making yourself vulnerable. Talk about that. So, I mean, a lot of people, I'm sure at this point, have read the book. I'm sure some people haven't. So why is that important to really to target? I mean, I know with good writing, especially if you're writing a story, you want to elicit emotions out of people and you have to know what those are. But speak about vulnerability and trying to be like a quote unquote, like a real person and making yourself approachable, which is hard for a lot of professionals, especially dentists or medical doctors, not so much as a chiropractor. That comes naturally because we're putting our hands on people a lot.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's so interesting. So, I'll share this experience, and it comes from the corporate world. I had a mentor of mine. His name was John Hamlin. He was the CEO of a tech company. And he was like the most incredible guy. If you ever met somebody that can just like sprinkle fairy dust on a situation, everybody would just kind of go, ooh, he was that guy. Like, can you think of someone like that just has that gift?
Yeah, I know. My middle daughter, Emily, you spoke earlier in the intro to the call about living in New York City. She graduated from Ball State and with a degree in performing arts and moved straight to New York City on her own. And she's, whenever I'm around her, she's always uplifting me. And I could say the same about, the beautiful and talented Lisa. That's my wife. I mean, she's got this natural ability. She's very magnetic. It's very real. It's not any kind of a sales job or any kind of a put on. She's very uplifting, and she always seems to have me in the right state of mind and in the right mood and feeling good and confident. So yeah, there are people like that I know. Not very many, but.
Well, then you're talking about family and daughters. My youngest daughter is a senior in high school, and it's been like the most stressful period. This college application process isn't like what it was when we were going to school. It's psycho. And there's so much anxiety and stress, and my daughter is struggling. And I talked to her therapist the other day on the phone to do like a check-in, even though that's her space to go and have, and do her own work. But and I have a tendency to kind of like go after a problem. I don't know if a lot of guys are like this, but just like this caveman approach to just like, what's going on? Try to solve the problem, be like a fireman. And I know it doesn't work because every time I do that in life, people repel. But her therapist said to me, she goes, Ben, I have some advice for you. I'm like, what? And she goes, think of, this might be bad because your daughter's not an animal, but think of like a cat. When you chase a cat, they just run away, and sometimes you just have to let the cat come to you, and it takes a different level of like finesse.
Yep.
And I was like, no, duh, like she's speaking to me about my own work. The person in my life that was like that was this CEO of this company that I worked for. And he was the most graceful guy. I always thought like a leader, it was you have to be this big, bad, type A carnivore, personality. But this guy, John, was just so, just handled things with such grace. And everybody always called him the best, like most inspiring, but just influential guy. Whatever he was selling, you're buying. Like whenever I was stuck, you'd go to him. Anyways, every time we would meet with customers, he would just kind of sit back like this really cool cat, just kind of watch the room. And he would always just lob something in like, hey, that reminds me of an experience when I was working at AT&T. And when I worked at AT&T, and he was just always, like, I remember he shared this story about how he made this really, with a customer of ours, he made this really massive mistake. And he opened up this meeting with a hostile customer. So I want you to imagine like meeting with a customer who's just, on the defense. He starts this meeting up by saying, hey, let me share with you why I do what I do. He goes, I worked at this big telecommunications company before, and we had acquired a smaller company, and we made so many mistakes because we never bothered to like meet with our customers and like consult with them and be like, we never had any mechanism to like to be the ears and the eyes of the customer. So we made all these mistakes. And he goes, now that, I'm the CEO of this company, we're in the connection business. We got to be the thing we are. So I got to work on connection. So I'm here meeting with you because I'm not going to let that happen in my company. And like, that was an example of a story that I heard. And I remember when he opened up and shared that with his customer, this hostile customer in return looked at him and goes, "Hey, John, here's some of the mistakes we made." And I was watching these two people form a connection through their mistakes. And in our work lives, what I've come to learn is like we have this thing backwards.
Yep.
Vulnerability. I think the wisdom now is that the conventional thought is that we have to have trust and safety to be vulnerable. But we have it backwards. I think what John knew, and some people know, is that vulnerability creates trust. And I call it like this vulnerability loop. It's a cycle that when we share things about ourselves, including our imperfections, right, that we find connection in those imperfections. We find actually beauty in it. And yet so many people look at vulnerability like a weakness, but it's this vulnerability loop that when somebody shares something of ourselves, other people feel.
They feel like you're approachable and that you're trustworthy. It's when you can admit that you're not perfect. That's one of the problems that I try to get across to dentists. And it's a problem that I actually myself dealt with for a long time when I was much younger, was that, you're afraid to admit that you've ever made a mistake. I think one of the quotes in the book was, don't be a Superman. And so as a result of that, dentists want to come across their professional reputation, and it's important. I understand that. But you can't just come across like, there's only one person who's ever walked on water. Okay. And you can't come across that way to your patients because it's alienating, it's off-putting, and it's uncomfortable on a very subconscious, very intimate level. And one of the things, in talking about working with a prospective client or prospective patient, one of the things you said in the book, and I think this will segue perfectly into this question is, one of the things let me just say this. One of the things that I try to tell my clients, because it's important, I try to tell our members is, listen, when you're in with a prospective new patient or a client, you cannot ignore the elephant in the room, and it has to do with trust. And that is every single time, I won't say every single time, but virtually every single time that person sitting across from you or on a video call with you or in a seminar, they're thinking to themselves, is this guy or this lady, are they telling me this because this is really what's best for me? Or are they telling this to me because they only want my money? And so you address this in the book, and I think going back, talking about a loop, if we loop back to proactively making yourself or displaying vulnerability in your communications, which I'd like you to kind of follow up with my point here and put the icing on it, but explain why that's so important in the context of what I just talked about. Because, a lot of people are making the mistake of coming across trying to sound like, they're the be all to end all. There's a lot of chest thumping that goes on, especially in marketing today. And people are tired of that. They're just not very responsive to it.
Well, I think back at, I was so scared of dentists.
A lot of people are. There's a name for that. It's called dental fear. There's, a lot of them are terrified.
Doubly worse because I have a small mouth, and I remember my dentist when I was a kid would be like, "Here you go, open your mouth." I'm like, "Oh, I got, dude."
It's not going anymore.
But I think there is something that could have been different about the experience that wasn't so frightening and cold and clinical. And I think about the question we're all asked when we go to the dentist, how often do you brush? And then, and everybody just lies. Our kids certainly lie to that.
Yeah.
And, but there's no connection. And I feel like it's not an expert's job to perform the procedure in that moment. It's it's our job to get people to change their behaviors. So then how do you inspire somebody to feel comfortable? That's a conversation. Right? Look at this is kind of a little bit wacky, but I want to share this. I read this incredible story. I think it gets to the heart of this. There's this town in the Midwest, all white town, small little town, and 24 Somali refugees were displaced, and they were being sent to this town. And so here you have this white town, you have these Somali displaced women. They were mostly women with young children and pregnant women. There was 20 or 30 of them. They were sent to this town. The officials in the town accepted them. They were taking them in, but the entire town was this big uproar. It was as black versus white as you get, us versus them as you get. The entire city was no, send them back, right? They couldn't do that. These women come because they have these, a lot of them are pregnant women that were coming to this town. They had a clinic in the town, but the clinic was overwhelmed. So they needed volunteers to come help. So they kind of put this message out, and they were like, and only like 2 or 3 women from the town showed up to just volunteer in the clinic. Okay. And so there's like and it sounded like the 2 or 3 women that did show up to volunteer did it reluctantly, but they weren't professional. They weren't experts. So they weren't able to like perform any kind of real healthcare support to these women. So they just sat with these women, and they sat with these women for like a day, like an entire day. And something magical happened in that entire day, that these women started to hear that these other women, this us versus them, went completely away because they started to hear the stories of their lives. And what they realized was that these women were no different than them. They had the same fears, the same insecurities, the same hopes for a better life for their children, right? And everything changed. And these volunteers went back and sort of shared the stories to the community. And the following weekend, like a dozen women came and volunteered. And then it became like this avalanche where the entire town galvanized around this and supported these women. And it literally went from us versus them, right, mentality, to just like an us. We're all in together, right? Yeah. And it came from people getting to know each other in this vulnerable way. Like, what's more vulnerable than sharing the stories of motherhood and being displaced from a war-torn village or whatever, right? And that might sound far-fetched, but I think that gets to the heart of how and why we are inspired to do things together. We're inspired to follow people that are not that we like, but that are like us.
Right.
That are like us. And the vulnerability loop I think you're talking about is, do we share who we are? Can we take off the mask, the veneer of superficiality, take off the mask, share who we are? And then once we do that, we realize that, okay, you and I are alike. We're the same flawed. I know about the traumas of your life, Ken. I know about your family life. I know what your fears are. I know what's important to you. And I do. Now, I'll take the shirt off my back for you, or we can move mountains together because we are alike. And now I think about any kind of situation where there's expert versus non-expert, doctor, patient, teacher, student. Right? I think about my kids. 1 year my daughter hates math. The next year she loves math.
Because she likes the teacher.
Because she likes teaching. Then you sort of lift up the hood and look at within. It's because she knows everything about, and the teacher knows everything about, and people work stuff out together. Mm-hmm. So when I think about healthcare providers, like, instead of putting on this front and this expertise that we all, that we're like warriors, we're like scared of them, right? We repel from them. We go in reluctantly, and we don't do, it's like, what if we took off the mask and we were just like our patients? We let people into who we are. I have this one doctor. I had a knee injury a few years ago. And he walks into the room, but he's not wearing a white coat. He was an orthopedic surgeon. I'll never forget it. And he walks in, and I go, this is so silly. He looks kind of disheveled, like his shirt's kind of out. It's kind of rolled up sleeves, right? And he walks in, and I go, when is Dr. Mills going to come in? And it was Dr. Mills. He goes, "Hi, I'm Andrew." And he sits down. We start to, talk. He looks at my knee, but he's like, "Tell me why you're here." But the conversation didn't go to my knee. It's like, I had this happen playing basketball. Oh, really? I play basketball. Oh, really? And there was this conversation, and it, like 15 minutes into the conversation, it wasn't like wham, bam, thank you, man. It was like something else actually happened. He started to understand me because I got into this whole thing, started to understand, and I feel like even diagnoses go wrong, and because we're not getting to the heart of people's stories. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense, because when you get to the heart of their story, as an example, and they get to the heart of your story, so to speak, you talked about a bond and you talked about trust. Whether they're really aware of it or not, those patients are going to respond to your care much faster. They're going to be much more willing to accept your recommendations for treatment.
Yeah.
They're going to be much less skeptical when you tell them, hey, listen, this is, your insurance doesn't cover this. This is going to be $65,000, but look at all these other tests, look at all the patients we've worked with before. Look how it's changed their life. They're much more apt to want to jump in with that. You speak of 3 different types of stories. So, I want to touch on that.
And going back to that situation with Andrew.
Yeah.
And there's something about just Andrew that's different than Dr. Mills. Not that that's that important, but it was about his prescription, or to me, the thing I had to go follow. And I had to go do physical therapy. I remember when I had to go back and visit him again 6 weeks later. Like, I was not going to go back and not have done my part.
You don't want to disappoint him.
I didn't want to. We were like in this together. We formed a bond, and we overlooked that bond. A friend of mine had, friend of mine who I've been friends with for a long time. I've worked with him. We all got whispers that he was taking a medical leave from work. And it turns out that he had open heart surgery, and they caught this thing, thank God, in time. And about 2 months went by, and I finally called him or texted him. I said, hey, let's check in if you're able to. And we get on the phone, and he was telling me what he was going through. He's like, this was literally, like, if you think about going through hell and back, that's what I went through. Like, the pain was so excruciating, right? And he goes, what saved my life, Ben? And I was like, what? He goes, the touch of the nurse. And I was like, what? The touch of the nurse. He goes, I remember feeling the nurse's hand on my arm, and the nurses were just always there. And that's kind of like, the touch of the nurse is what he remembers, not the surgeon who opened his chest up and performed the surgery. Like, I think about that, and I think about like bedside manner in this case, or what nurses do, like the care, the human experience of connecting with people. And if we just want to focus on that, I think the fear is I only have 12 minutes to do what I need to do on a sales call. If you have listeners out there that are selling medical devices, or, right, we have to get to the problem and then get to the solution because people need to know the ROI and all this stuff. Like, who convinced us of that?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up part 1 of the interview, but I just want to cover a few points with you before we close the show. Remember, number 1, storytelling literally has the power to connect with your prospects like no other medium can. It bridges the gap and removes any sense of separation between you and your prospect. Number 2, not all stories work. There are good stories, obviously, and there are bad stories. The good ones are going to create a bridge between you and your prospect, between you and your patient, between you and your client. The bad stories are going to fall flat, or even worse, they're going to widen the gap of communication between you and your prospect. Number 3, and lastly, storytelling is a skill that can be practiced, learned, and perfected. It's like any other skill or discipline. And yes, it is a skill. Yes, it is a discipline. The more you know, the better you're going to become, and the better your results are going to be. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's show with Ben. We're going to pick up with part 2 of the interview in episode number 328. And in that episode, Ben's going to reveal several different frameworks for how to utilize authenticity and how to use vulnerability in your story structure framework. All right? We'll see you guys then. If your business is struggling and you can't crack the online marketing code, and you'd like to access the newest and most effective strategies, systems, and tools that are working right now in the trenches, check out the funneltribes.com online community and discover how thousands of consultants and professionals just like you are transforming their businesses, building massive tribes of loyal clients, and making more money.